الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليًا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليًا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His bounties and His favors upon all of us, and I seek His forgiveness on my own behalf and on behalf of all mu'mineen and mu'minat for our sins and our shortcomings. We are here at the beginning of the month of Rabi' al-Awwal. This is the third month of the Islamic calendar, and it is a month that by its name is associated with spring. Now, as you know, the Islamic months, they circulate through the year, and so within the Islamic calendar there is no one season, according to the solar calendar, that is always associated with a particular Islamic month. The month of Muharram, over the course of 30-some years, will go from winter to the fall, and then summer and spring, and then it will come back to the winter. To take a generation for that full circulation, a little more than 30 years, but there is no one time that is associated with the Islamic month, whether it be Muharram or Shahe Ramadan or Hajj or any other occasion. And yet the name of some of our Islamic months is associated with a particular climate or a season. It is sometimes said that, for example, the month of Ramadan is derived from the Arabic word Ramadan, which means the extremity of heat and the thirst that results from heat. Although the month of Ramadan does not only occur in the summer. Thankfully, sometimes it is in the winter, or in the fall, or in the spring. And the month of Rabi' al-Awwal is the same way. Rabi' means spring. And Rabi' al-Thani, which is next month, according to the Islamic calendar, it also has the same root. Rabi' means spring. Now, some have said that historically, either the Arabic months were aligned with the season, and therefore Rabi' took place in what was the springtime in the Arabian Peninsula, corresponding maybe towards winter or the end of winter according to our modern seasons, because that is when it was pleasant and it was cool in the desert and in the warmer lands of Hijaz. Or when these months were named, at that time it just so happened that this month of Rabi' al-Awwal took place in the cooler period, which was comparable to spring. So either it was always in the spring, or it happened that in that year it was in the springtime and these months were named. That is why these months were named in that way. But from an Islamic perspective, we have another approach to understanding how Rabi' al-Awwal is a spring. It is not necessarily just a question of the climate and the seasons of the world around us, but because of the nature of springtime. What is the nature of springtime? That is described in Surah Ar-Rum in verse number 50, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, فَانظُرْ إِلَىٰ آثَارِ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. Look at the signs of the mercy of God. كَيْفَ يُحْيِي الْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ مَوْتِهَا. How is it that Allah brings life to the earth after it is dead? And if you think to the desolation and the darkness and the landscape in winter, then you might think that the trees are completely dead. The plants, that their roots will also have frozen and they're not going to come back. You might not see much animal life around you. And then a few months pass and the springtime comes, and كَيْفَ يُحْيِي الْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ مَوْتِهَا. You see that this is a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He brings life after the darkness and the desolation and the cold of winter. Even in those areas where with our human eye we might think that it's not going to come back. Just that few weeks of time that passes between the end of winter and the beginning of spring, whenever it might be in a particular area. So springtime is not only a season in the year, but it is also a sign, فَانظُرْ إِلَىٰ آثَارِ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ, a sign of God's mercy. And the greater mercy, that will be a true spring. One sign of God's mercy is when the weather gets better and agriculture becomes possible and plant and animal kingdom comes to life and human beings also feel a kind of freshness and an energy. That's one kind of divine mercy. But that mercy is also a reminder for us of the Day of Judgment. إِنَّ ذَلِكَ لَمُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى وَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. Verse number 50 of Surah Al-Rum continues. That the same one who brings the earth to life after it is dead, that is the one who is going to bring the dead human beings to life on the day of resurrection. So, to recap, spring is a time when the physical world comes back to life, plants and animals and even human beings. But it is not just a matter of a time of year. It is a sign of God's mercy, and it is a reminder of the day of judgment. And so from that physical reality, we extract a spiritual reality. And that spiritual reality is to see God's mercy and to see that the day of judgment is not something far-fetched that we are being taught is going to happen at the end of time, like some kind of fairy tale or some kind of legend created by human beings in ancient history, but it is something that we can perceive. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He revives the physical world and He shows us His power, He shows us His wisdom, He shows us the way in which He governs all of the affairs of the universe. And it is that same wisdom and that same power, and it is that same divine governance that is going to bring about the day of judgment. So you can look at spring as a physical reality. When trees, they blossom, when plants, they come back to life, when greenery is visible, when the sounds and the movement of animals becomes visible, when the ice and the snow melt, that is the physical reality of spring. Or you can look at the spiritual reality of spring, which is the lesson we learn from that physical revival, of the mercy of God, of the power of God, of the wisdom of God, and of the reality of the resurrection that is decreed by God for each and every one of us and for all of human beings at the end of time. And that is the spiritual and the moral reality of spring. So in this month of Rabi al-Awwal, maybe at one time it was actually tied to the physical season of spring. Whenever spring would take place in the Arabian Peninsula, maybe it wasn't March, maybe it was February or even January when the weather was like that. Maybe that physical reality was tied to the month of Rabi al-Awwal and Rabi al-Thani at one time. But today in the Islamic calendar, Rabi al-Awwal is spring as a reminder of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It evokes for us that spiritual reality of spring, even if it's not coming in the season of spring. Like this year, it is the end of summer or the beginning of fall. Doesn't mean that it is out of place. The spiritual reality of spring is present for us. What is the spiritual reality of spring? There are a number of occasions that took place in the month of Rabi al-Awwal that are also atharu rahmatillah. When Allah talks about the season of spring, He says, فَانظُرْ إِلَىٰ آثَارِ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ كَيْفَ يُحْيِي الْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ مَوْتِهَا. And when we want to understand the spiritual reality of spring, then we will see آثَارُ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ, which are even more powerful than the physical revival of life in the season of spring. We will see signs of God's mercy that are even more powerful than the material mercy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows us in our physical life. And what is that spiritual mercy? It is what brings us our guidance and our salvation. This month is the month of the beginnings that remind us of our spiritual spring and blossoming. A few of the occasions that are found in the month of Rabi al-Awwal. One is the birth of our blessed Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi himself. So if there are atharu rahmatillah in creation, then our Prophet is rahmatun lil alameen, and he was born in the month of Rabi al-Awwal. Some historians have said that it was the 12th of the month of Rabi al-Awwal, and the more common opinion among the students and the followers of Ahlul Bayt is that it was the 17th of the month of Rabi al-Awwal. Some people have a misconception that the Sunnis believe in the 12th of Rabi al-Awwal and the Shia believe in the 17th of Rabi al-Awwal. That is not accurate. There were some Shi'i scholars like Marhum Muhammad ibn Yaqub al-Kulayni, the compiler of al-Kafi, who did hold that the 12th of Rabi al-Awwal was the correct date. And then the majority of the followers of the Shi'i school and the followers of Ahlul Bayt, they hold that the 17th of Rabi al-Awwal is more accurate. But both of those opinions are held by scholars and by ulama from the school of the followers of Ahlul Bayt. Regardless, whether it's the 12th or the 17th of Rabi al-Awwal, this month is when that greatest spiritual mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descended to this earth, and the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi began. Then it is also the month in which the great grandson of our Prophet and our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq, was born. And that is also on the 17th of Rabi al-Awwal. So this was also a spring, because after generations, when the Shia and the followers of Ahlul Bayt were oppressed and were not even able to publicly mention the name of Ahlul Bayt. You could not name your children after Ahlul Bayt, because that would bring suspicion from the governments. You could not perform your Islamic worship and rituals and obligations according to the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, because that would bring oppression or suspicion from the government. And sometimes people were even afraid of their own neighbors or their own family members, that maybe if word gets out, then it will be difficult for people to be able to continue their life and have their liberty and their freedom. We have from the time of Imam Muhammad Baqir alayhi salatu wassalam, that people would sometimes say to the Imam that it is time for me to get married, but I don't know how I can get married because I can't find people who are believers in the proper teachings of Islam according to the guidance of Ahlul Bayt. And I do not dare to mention it openly, and so some of people who maybe have difficulty getting married today, they can relate to that. Sometimes people who accept Islam, they may have a hard time because they don't have a network of family and friends, and they are not part of a widespread culture, and so sometimes it is difficult for them to find a spouse. They can somewhat relate to what the Shia faced up until the time of Imam Muhammad Baqir alayhi salatu wassalam. That in many areas you are few and far between. And even if you do have relatives, but because they are not Shia, because they are not followers of Ahlul Bayt, so it is difficult for you to have a match and to get married. But we don't see that after the time of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, because this was a new beginning, a new spring for the Shia, that the teachings of Ahlul Bayt could be proclaimed publicly and they could be spread. And so now the Shia, they were able to assert their beliefs, they were able to practice, they were able to come together and learn and worship and teach one another, and that also had not just a religious effect, but it also made it easier for them to get married, to establish families, and all of the other tasks that a human being has in life. So just like Prophet Muhammad's birth was the beginning of one mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to humanity, which was by the spreading of the message of Tawheed and Islam. The birth of our sixth Imam was also a fresh start and a spring for the Muslim community, because that is the Imam who, more than any other Imam, all of them taught, all of them, we have ahadith and we have guidance from them, but more than any other Imam, it is Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, who gave us that beautiful garden, that fragrant garden of the teachings of Ahlul Bayt that were accessible and that were spread among the Muslims. So Rabi' al-Awwal, on a spiritual level, it is associated with the birth of our Prophet. It is associated with the birth of our sixth Imam, and it is also the month that is associated with the imamat of our 12th Imam, Imam Mahdi alayhi salatu wassalam. And this is also a beginning. Our Imam, according to most narrations, was born in the month of Sha'ban, the 15th of the month of Sha'ban. But his imamat began in the month of Rabi'ul Awwal, on the 9th of the month of Rabi'ul Awwal, or the 8th of the month of Rabi'ul Awwal to be more precise, after the martyrdom of Imam Hassan al-Askari. So this was also a time for the Shia to think of their Imam and to think of the favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He has given us the blessing to be alive in the time of the final Imam, to be alive in the time when we are to expect the call and the appearance of our Imam morning and evening, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that it will come unexpectedly and it can come anytime. That is a great favor and a great blessing. And to understand and to appreciate how great a blessing it is, look at the ahadith, where people would sometimes come to our previous Imams and say, "Are you the one who is promised to establish justice in every corner of the earth?" And now our Imams, they had a duty by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to maintain a certain kind of silence about when the Imam who is promised to establish justice in humanity will come and who that is. So in many cases, the Imams, they simply said that there are certain signs. In some cases, the Imams gave a little bit more detail, and they might have said that this is not going to be me, but it will be one of my descendants. Because the Imams, they had a duty by Allah to maintain hope in the hearts of people, and also to prepare them to be ready for when that promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes place. So look at those questions when people would come to Imam Ja'far Sadiq, when people would come to Imam Musa Kadhim, when people would come to each of our Imams, and they would say, are you the Mahdi? Are you the one that we are waiting for, that we are praying for? And how delicately and how gently the Imams would answer those Shia. Because it's not a simple question. It's not simply a superficial question. When people would ask, they would have tears in their eyes. They would have prayers. They would have hopes. Many of them, they may have saved their money. They may have made arrangements with their children, with their families, that I am going for Hajj, I am going to ask, and if the Imam gives me the indication, then I am going to stay with the Imam and I am going to serve the Imam. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will decree if we are going to be reunited. So understand the context when somebody would ask Imam Ja'far Sadiq. It's not like he lived next door. And then he came and he said, Imam Ja'far Sadiq, tell me, were you born on Tuesday or were you born on Wednesday? That's just a superficial question. But you can see the hope, you can see the prayers, you can see the sincerity and the devotion when people would ask. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the answer to that question, and He has given us the blessing of being alive in the time of that promised one without us even having asked for it, and in many cases without us even being properly aware of it. So the month of Rabi al-Awwal is also spring on a spiritual level from another dimension. Once again, the month of the birth of Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. The month of the birth of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. The month of the imamat of the Imam of our time. Not when he was born, but when he became the wali and the imam of all of humanity, and in particular, the followers of Ahlul Bayt. And two other occasions in the month of Rabi al-Awwal that I want to mention, and then I will conclude. One is that according to some narrations, this is the month in which Laylatul Mabit took place. And this was the night in which Imam Ali alayhi salatu wassalam, he slept in the bed of the Prophet, which allowed the hijrah to take place. And so it was that night, that was when Imam Ali offered his life to save the life of the Prophet, and then that was the beginning of the hijrah, which took place also in the month of Rabi al-Awwal. So this was another beginning of Islam. Just like the Prophet's birth is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that mercy, it developed. Let's say that you plant the seed of a tree that's going to bear fruit. When you plant the seed, then you might say that this is the birth of a tree that is going to give fruit. But it might be years before you actually see a stalk develop into a firm trunk, and then you see blossoms and you see the first fruit appear. Maybe 5 years later, maybe 10 years later, maybe even longer. Then as that tree develops, every new stage, you can say that this is a new birth. This is a new manifestation of that mercy. When the plant shoots up out of the ground, that is a new birth. Then when the first blossom comes, that is a new birth. That year you might not have fruit. Then maybe the next year or 2 years later, when you have the first fruit, which will be few, then that will be another birth and another manifestation of God's mercy. So for our Prophet, his birth was one mercy, but then that tree, it developed gradually. And it reached its greatest manifestation upon the hijrah of the Prophet to Medina. And that began with Laylatul Mabit, the sacrifice of Imam Ali alayhi salam, after which our Prophet migrated. So this is also part of the spiritual spring of Rabi al-Awwal. And finally, according to many narrations, it was on the 10th of the month of Rabi al-Awwal, in 3 days from now, when the marriage of Prophet Muhammad and Sayyidah Khadija salamullahi alayha took place. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So this is also one of those signs of God's mercy, because it was this marriage of the Prophet to Sayyidah Khadija that bore the fruit of imamat and wilayat, and that ensured that the message of the Prophet continued. When the enemy said, Inna Muhammadan abtar, na'udhu billah, when they said that the Prophet, his line will come to an end, Allah had decreed that this would be a continuing message through the blessing given to the marriage of our Prophet and Sayyidah Khadija. And when the Quran says, Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar, that kawthar, it is the fruit of that spring, the fruit of that tree, and according to narrations, that marriage was also solemnized in the month of Rabi al-Awwal. So in the month of Rabi al-Awwal, we have many different beginnings for us to be aware of. In spring, many of us, we become excited and enthusiastic. Maybe we make some resolutions that we're going to see more of nature and we're going to exercise, and it brings a certain nashat. It brings a certain enthusiasm to the body. Let the month of Rabi al-Awwal bring an enthusiasm to our soul. This is the month when Allah blessed us with the birth of our Prophet. The month when Allah blessed us with the birth of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. The month when Allah blessed us with the imamat of Imam Mahdi. The month when Allah blessed us with the migration of the Prophet that established the first Muslim community and society. The month when Allah blessed us with the beginning seed of Kawthar, which have continued to give barakah and rahmah and mercy to the Muslims from that time until today, and will continue until the Day of Judgment. How many beginnings, how many beautiful plants do we have, flowers do we have to be grateful for, and to bring enthusiasm and excitement to our heart and our soul. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant all of us to be appreciative and grateful for these blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and may this be the month that is the spring of our soul. Because gratitude is through our connection and our commitment and our learning from our Prophet and our Imams about how we are to live our lives. May Allah grant all of us that favor and complete the mercy that He has given us in this month of Rabi al-Awwal. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar fasalli li rabbika wanhar. Inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، لا سيما علي أمير المؤمنين، وعلى فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين وعلى الحسن والحسين وعلي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين. صلوات. In the second khutbah, I will simply thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His bounties and His favors. Allah has told us in the Quran that if we try to count all of His favors, then we will not be able to do so. But it is useful for us to sometimes try, just because it gives us a sense of the gravity and the abundance of God's favors. And what we learn, if you try to count the favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that you are just going further and further in debt to Allah. Because as Imam Zain al-Abidin says in Dua Makarim al-Akhlaq, Oh Allah, every time I thank you and I praise you for your bounty, that in itself is a bounty. And so I am more in your debt, because there are many people who are ungrateful, who don't know and don't recognize who gave them all of the good things that they have in life. And so they may have abundance, but they have meaninglessness, or they have pointlessness in their life. They live a nihilistic life because they don't know, or they don't admit who is the source of those favors. If I know to show gratitude to Allah and I express that gratitude, then I am not paying a debt to Allah, I am going further in debt to Allah. Because that is a mercy and a kindness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shown me, that He has guided me to recognize and to be grateful for His favors. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to always keep us cognizant and to always allow us to remember who is the source of all of the bounties that we have and who is their true owner, so that we devote our lives to the service and obedience and the pleasure of Allah. And in doing so, we attain the greatest pleasure and satisfaction and the greatest success and salvation for ourselves that is humanly possible. And I ask Allah's forgiveness for myself and all of us present and all mu'mineen and mu'minat for all of our sins and shortcomings. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsani wa ita'i dhil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkari wal baghi ya'idhukum la'allakum tadhakkarun. Sallu ala Muhammad wa Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلاة الجمعة. الله أكبر الله أكبر.